coming. So, as Chuck says, I am Zarafu, Managing Director of BYKKO. It's I have this, always doubt if it's a startup or is not. I went to a lot of networking events and accelerators asking, I am a startup? Or because in my, everyone seems to associate this idea of startup with, very young hipster founders and associated with an app. And when you go to look for funding and you say, this is quite capital intensive business, there are assets, everyone seems to step back, we are interested in apps. Okay, apps are good, but apps connects people with assets, with services. Someone has to provide all of this. So we define ourselves more like entrepreneurs and startups in the idea that all my life, and you can see at any age, you can start from zero. You can start from scratch. We started our journey in Australia about 10 years ago when we moved from Romania to Australia on a scholarship from CSIRO. But speaking of visa, visa department has nothing to do with professional careers. So it doesn't matter what experience you have. If you don't fill certain criteria, you can't get visa. So it took us about 5 years, a master by research at UTS, sponsorship from a local government council in Sydney, and still it wasn't good enough for the visa department. So, as I said, we started when in Romania I was general manager of an international freight company with head office in New York. And I did research. When I started here, the first job I got doing my master by research at UTS was a childcare worker. I couldn't get any other job because I don't have local experience. So I started from scratch many times. In business, I am a transport engineer, but I played with different ideas around businesses. I had an online website selling stockings from Europe. Australian woman doesn't wear stockings, so it didn't work. My daughter was very enthusiastic about a clothes brand from United States, and we imported that clothes. No one here other than my daughter was keen to wear that, clothes. So we tried. My husband had an advertising agency back in Romania, and here we discovered there are totally different rules and, taste around, plus budget. Budgets here are not as big as in Europe on advertising. So then I stopped and I thought, okay, what is what I know the best? I know transport. Doesn't matter, freight, public transport. I was transport engineer working for National Railway. I did freight, shipping, containers. I did research in what we call now driverless cars, but mass transit, automatic network systems. I got awards in United States. Here in Australia, my research is not so well known, but probably in time, it's a good time now to rethink that thesis. So I was in almost every transport mode involved other than bikes. And I had, this idea. At that time, I had a pretty good job at City of Ride in Sydney. And I told my husband, we should do something about bikes. I think this is the future. Because, with my research and everything, I watch the phenomenon around Europe, United States, and I say, guys, our urban space is limited. We can't continue in the same way. We can't accommodate so many cars. So what is the easiest and cheapest infrastructure? It's cycling. And then I start looking, okay, what's happening in Australia? Why don't we have bike sharing? Because almost every city in Europe where you go, small or big, they have a bike share scheme, public or private, but they have. United States also. Australia, in terms of transport and planning, it's kind of similar, and culture is kind of similar to America. We have big cities spread out, you know, not very dense cities. Even America started, you know, investing in bike sharing, and I started actually studying the phenomenon as my personal research interest. What's happening in Australia? Why we don't do here anything? And to be honest, I couldn't find any strong reason. So for me, from a business perspective, I thought this is a gap in the market, and we can actually start looking at this gap. It's a bit strange because everyone says identify a need and then come with a product or a service. We identify the gap, trying to understand what are the barriers to fill that gap. Because here in Australia, we don't have such a big need or requirements for cycling. We don't have the culture of cycling, and we don't have a culture of sharing space on roads. Everyone hates the other user, you know. Drivers are met with cyclists, cyclists with drivers, and pedestrians with everyone else, and so forth. And coming from Europe, you know, we use in transport all these beautiful cities as examples, like Amsterdam, Stockholm, you know. They weren't like this 20, 30, 50 years ago. They had the same issues we have. Congestion. This was the main issue, the main problem, who dictated a shift in planning, in you know, investments, in everything. So with this idea in mind, we started actually looking at cycling, and we found an opportunity to start a small business with push bikes for hiring. We have a few terminals on Honeysuckle Drive. So we started with Sydney and Newcastle, and I got this question very often, why we choose Newcastle? At that time, and I'll be very honest, we choose Newcastle because other than Sydney, we look at other opportunities where it's a big tourist hub, and not only for international tourists, but local tourists, even for conferences. And we thought Newcastle is pretty good. It has a university, it has airport, it has a large number of tourists, and it's not nothing much else to do. So without cycling as an, you know, activity on your holiday, you know, you can come here for, this was our perception where we lived in Sydney, okay? And all our friends and partners say we are crazy. Why would you invest in Newcastle? And I say, I have a good feeling. So we came, we saw the city. Okay, there are a few very nice sites to visit, but how do you get there, you know? At night, you don't, you know, you can't find even a taxi, or this was the story about 5 years ago. It's much better now, but, and we said, I think it's good, and we identified, because we had some criteria selecting locations, okay, to be, you know, in a visible place with good traffic, and this is how we started. And coming very often from Sydney to Newcastle to service the bikes and to connect with local businesses, to understand more the, you know, Newcastle culture, we like very much. So we decided a few years ago to move permanently here. So we moved here. We still have a shared office in Sydney, but in the end we moved, you know, completely. Our house here, our head office here, and started working from here. The presentation is very much more about the system. So I'm not, but I want to show you some examples around the world. So, and we analyzed all the ingredients, good ingredients for a bike share scheme, not necessarily a public one. And we choose as an example Deco Bike in Miami Beach. It's one of the at that time, 10 years ago, when I started looking at bike sharing, it was probably the only profitable bike share scheme in the world, 100% privately run, so it wasn't a partnership with government. And we started looking at Miami Beach and compared to Newcastle, and we say, wow, you know, we can see a lot of similarities here. Then we did a bit more studies about demographics and everything. And we say Newcastle will be actually perfect to start with a public bike share scheme. It was also easier for us because we had all this data, so we started lobbying government. 4 years ago, almost no one in Australia, at least from my network, and I went to conferences and meetings with officials and all levels of government, almost no one knew about what is bike sharing. If you told them, do you know Boris Bikes in London? Okay, that one is bike sharing. Have you been to New York? That one is bike sharing. So now it's quite funny because now, since the dockless bike share systems in Sydney and Melbourne, everyone thinks they know what is bike sharing, and they think it's a disruption in bike sharing. It's not. The first dockless system, actually the first bike share system was dockless, but they didn't evolve so broadly because it wasn't sustainable. And with the technology at that time, when you didn't have so much data, it wasn't, very hot topic as it is today. So we went through all this process from no one knowing what we are talking about and going to presentations and conferences, and everyone was pretty bored. So I started, bringing photos from around the world with either corporate fleets, pretty fun events you can do on a bike fleet. The famous Googleplex, they have team meetings on that Googleplex. Obviously, they are Google. Very nice colored bikes, and we also notice it's a trend now overseas to provide different facilities, green infrastructure with new developments. This is a very expensive Ritz-Carlton residence in Miami Beach, and they will provide bike share for residents. And I thought that actually this will be much easier to implement and start with rather than public bike share schemes in Australia, where I hate stereotypes, but my personal experience in Australia was that it's very hard here to be innovative, to be the first. In Europe, if you are not the first, in Europe always, you need to try. Doesn't matter, you fail, but you have to come all the time in business with something new about your product, about services. Competition is really strong. While here, every single meeting, where else it's your system working? Well, in Oslo, in Zurich, in La Défense, in France, but not in Australia. Okay. So we started actually so about 2 years ago. Obviously, again, I knew what's happening with the dockless system since they started, because as I told you, I try to stay informed with what's happening. And when I saw the investors and the companies, I was sure that this will be huge. But okay, these are push bikes. You can't have expensive assets on the streets which can be easily stolen without affecting your business. So for us, and also I believe electric bikes are really good for Australian market, and not only for Australian market, but going back to my thinking when I decided in what direction to move the business, And looking at barriers in Australia, I thought electric bikes will cope much better with the topography of our cities. You know, we have long distances, pretty hilly. Sydney, it's hilly. Even Newcastle has a few hilly parts. But we have long distances. You know, you need to travel effortless, otherwise people won't make a choice. You know, it's not, you can't change behavior if it's not convenient. So we started looking at electric bikes and then compare with, you know, knowing that we will have a huge competition from dockless, without, you know, high-end technology with secure docking points. It can be a market for us, not necessarily in public space, but in private space. So we started actually working with developers. We didn't have much success in Newcastle at the time. The first, let's say, positive reaction was from Canberra. And this is because not only the government is very pro-cycling, which means developers, real estate developers, you know, get a favorable reaction when they submit their development application. So we started working with developers in Canberra, and to be honest, the first scheme we have is in Canberra, but it's a very small scale, because what we try to do is to convince developers to provide electric bikes for shared use by residents. And a few developers actually saw the potential as a sales and marketing tools, because Canberra is not such a hot property market like Sydney, so they need a competitive advantage. So they saw this advantage, and this is for every idea you have. You know, probably you heard this many times. You need to understand your customer needs. In our case, with this product, it was really difficult, even for marketing agency, because with private developers, our customer is the real estate developer, but they are not the user. The user is, you know, the person using the bike. So how do you present, how do you market, how do you sell a product, and how do you create your marketing strategy? We still don't have all answers. So we discussed with a lot of marketing agencies, and we got, you know, different advices, different, you know, strategies, but on a very low budget. So I can't say I have an answer. So these are other systems around the world, you know, very, very small networks. Hungary. Okay, and these are more about the system, but I don't think you know, today discussions it's about the system per se. It's probably more about the journey. Obviously, if you are interested about the system, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. As a business, we also try to diversify our offer, because as a business, and especially a small business, funding is, I think, for us, it was the major issue. It's very hard to get funding for new businesses. The banks won't give you business loans unless you have, you know, security like properties. We didn't have any security, because we sold actually everything to fund the business. Then you rely on, literally, go, if you believe in your idea and you think it has potential, go and pitch your idea to your friends, family. Family, it's a bit difficult, but friends, yes, they can help you. And this is how we funded the business. So we sold whatever we could sell here and overseas, and most of the money were from friends with interest, because you know, you don't want to ruin a friendship. But for you, if you have an idea, this is the starting point. Try to, to have funds for a few months, and you can focus on your idea and start developing. And I'm not going today to use the, as I said, the language in startup. I try to keep the talking very, very casual and, talk from my personal experience. Then always you start with a very small team. We started actually, myself and my husband. So initially he kept his job because we couldn't, live from nothing. In the end, he also quit his job. We had really good paid jobs, so we ended up, oh my God, what we're going to do, And you have never, you don't have the answer. So you go month after month and try and see how, what can you improve, what can you add to your business. Always you need to have a few more revenue avenues. Because if you focus just on one, or if you are very lucky and you can make money from, just one revenue stream for a while, but for the business in the future, it's really good to have more revenue streams. So we started adding consultancy studies, think about all you can offer, what are your skills, what are, try to benefit from that skills and get a product out of your skills, which will make you money for your main idea, to keep you on the line. So we do consultancy, we sell equipment, we operate equipment, so we have revenues from operating systems, but also from selling equipment to other parties. We also do service and maintenance for other operators around Australia. So we try to get as many revenues in our account, because cash flow it's a big issue for a startup. The social media now is pretty good. We are lucky. So this was our trial. We started with a very small trial 2 years ago. So we applied for a Make Your Community grant. I will end very soon. So that one was pretty much covered our banners and a bit of marketing. But it was really good because we could test the system in real life. So it was free for usage, so we had pretty good usage because it was free. And it was good because we got feedback from people what the issues are, what they would like to add to the system or to bikes or to to the website. It was a really good experience. And then we used this small trial when we applied for funding for on-demand public transport. So always look at any opportunity to get funds for your idea. It might come from somewhere you don't think, but look at all the funds, grants available and try to apply. It's not easy because the applications are pretty hard, but if you think it's a 50-50 chance, I always say, if it's less than 50 chance, I will probably not allocate resources because I don't have resources. But it's a 50-50 chance, it's a good learning process, and you can get funds, and then you can trial, small scales, bigger and bigger. So from 3 bikes, one station with 3 bikes, we have now 100 bikes, 19 stations, funded by New South Wales government. And we have another program coming at the end of the year, part of the Smart City funding from federal government to the city of Newcastle. So this is my advice, because in this way if you can pitch investors, obviously, and if you find the right investors for you. We had a few discussions, but nothing in the end, from various reasons. So we are still co-funded. Okay, and I have, I think, a few more photos from our launch, my amazing team. So from 2, we grow, and it's not all of them are permanent staff. So some of them are contractors, some of them are casual, some of them are full-time. But it's pretty good to have other people in your team. Lord Mayor. And this is what I really love about this system. It's for everyone. This wonderful lady, she's 88 years old. And we also have kids from 15 years old because you can't use an electric bike under 15. Okay. So as we said, 200 wheels, 100 smiles. This was our logo. So I'm not sure how it's the time.
Yeah, it's perfect. Has anyone got any questions for Monica?
Oh, sorry. Yep, Monica, what does or have you had a chance to consider the new European data protection laws, the GDPR, whatever it's called? Have you had a chance to consider what impact that might have on your business and data you could?
No, it actually doesn't impact negatively on our business because we are that kind of, I'm not sure if I should use the word ethical business, but we don't use data.
Right.
With this pilot, and we have a disclaimer in our website, this pilot is owned by Transport for New South Wales government. So all the data are made available to Transport for New South Wales. So so they can use data in what way they are going to use, but we are not affected because plus our software development team is in Europe. So we knew well in advance what would be these requirements, and we, as I said, we don't use data for any marketing purpose. This is what was my kind of point of difference, trying to convince governments that yes, it might be capital intensive, but the value of data they have there, plus the protection they can give users from any other usage of data, it's huge. But it's not easy to understand for many officials. We got this question, what is the value of data? Okay. Try to buy an email list to do a marketing campaign and you will see the value of data.
Can I say,
No, you
Tim?
So my question is about sort of infrastructure for bikes around here. So I lived in Germany for 4 years, and obviously the infrastructure for bikes is a lot better than it is in most of Australia. They have, on most pathways, they'll have like a specified bike lane. They'll have on most street lights, on most traffic lights, they'll have sort of specific bike signals and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering about how the infrastructure is in Newcastle, and sort of what, maybe you can comment on how the bikes are going to fit into that and whether it's changing or not.
Look, infrastructure is better than in other places. So in Newcastle is better than in other places. But it's not ideal, and none of Australian cities have good cycling infrastructure. But on the other hand, it's not a dangerous city to cycle. So not talking, and this is what I explained earlier, we do some studies, so we map the cities from a cyclist point of view of the streets, but not the main streets, because you can safely cycle on back streets. Yes, you don't have dedicated cycling infrastructure, But you have, you have the foreshore, you have parks, you have back streets, quiet back streets with no danger from cars, and it's where we would like to direct people. Secondly, if you don't have a critical mass of people on bikes, I don't like to name them cyclists, because they are not professional cyclists. And another reason I started this business is, since I moved to Australia, until 5 years ago when we started the business, I didn't use a bike, because it's not inviting. But then I remember how good it's in a bike and how quick you can move on a bike. Obviously, I was scared, and I'm not a good cyclist, so for me, electric bikes make my life much easier. And again, when you cycle, it's like the drivers, you pick your route. When you get your driver license, the first advice I got, learn your route, same route every day. Don't go on, learn the easiest route for you. The same thing applies to cycling. If you find your route and then follow their route, it will be easier. But if we don't have a critical mass of people requiring cycling funds for cycling infrastructure, come on, the governments won't invest, because they will invest in that for the 99% of population who drives. So we need to build that critical mass, and then things will start changing. And seeing all these bikes which are branded and will make other people think, I could try. Yeah, probably it's, I don't know, it's too expensive to to use the system, but I can buy a cheap bike and I will try. And it's a lot of research. Cycling is very much a social activity, so you are more inclined to cycle with a friend or a colleague, or unless you do, I don't know, real professional cycling, but for daily trips. So again, this was another reason why we selected Newcastle rather than Sydney to pilot the first public share scheme, because it's pretty risky for a business, and even for government. I really have to, how to say, to bow in front of government, because they selected they selected 11 pilots as part of their on-demand public transport. 10 of them are on-demand buses, shuttle buses, all of them, and the only different program is electric bike sharing. They don't, we still work with them on the indicators, trip indicators, because the program, it's designed for buses, not for bike sharing. But it's a big step forward, and because I worked with government and within government before, I know it's a huge risk they take, and I'm amazed that they selected us and they selected Newcastle as a good city to trial something like this. And it's pretty new. As I said, other than Madrid, which has a full-scale electric bike share network, all the other programs, they have normal push bikes, bike share scheme, and they added electric bikes. So this project will get a lot of attention from overseas, because everyone is looking, okay, let's see if electric bikes can bring more people to cycling, to bike sharing, We can't do much in terms of cycling infrastructure, And, but City of Newcastle, they have pretty good plans, so I saw their plans. So I think in 1-2 years we will see a big change. And everyone asks me, you choose a wrong moment, with what's happening here with all this construction. And to be honest, I think we are lucky that it happened, because the change happens when the normal life is disrupted. When people can't park their car, they might consider, okay, I might park my car at Bar Beach and jump on a bike, or come by train and try a bike. And if it works, you know, next month or next year, they might buy their own bike.
I really agree with that sentiment, because I'm actually at the park every like Cooks Hill, like to Almost way. I was walking back to here, I'm like, all right, I went to the kids section and bought myself a scooter, and yeah, it's half my walking time. So it's like doing these sorts of things to get that last leg, whilst you've got this construction going on, it makes a difference. So yeah, it does kind of make sense.
Because we all, you know, when you wake up in the morning and you know you have to be at 8 or 9 or 7 at one place, you think, okay, what is the quickest way? And a lot of people actually drive their car, not necessarily for the commuting trip, but for the trips they have to do during the day. You know, I have to drop my kids at school or whatever, I have to do some shopping and I can't, and with that trial, the small trial, we had people saying, you know what, today I'm not driving to work because I know I can take a bike. And I say, wow, this is fantastic. And you know, even Germany, you know, how many years it took to get there. So we need to have patience. This is what everyone told me since we moved to Australia. Learn to have patience. Okay.
Speaking of patience, Monica, you know how you were saying at the very beginning, way back, you were kind of going to lots of conferences as much as you could to learn about and talk about what it was you were trying to do. If you had someone, if there was another entrepreneur who was going through a similar experience that was really trying to break through with some kind of new technology or a new way of thinking about how to get a job done, and they had to do what you did, go to lots of conferences, what advice would you give them to make the most of those kinds of opportunities, or know when a conference or a meeting or something like that is worth it and when it maybe isn't worth it?
Oh, I don't think I have an answer. I think it's really important to go there and get your name out, and because if you learn a reputation, then people will trust you, and they will trust that, okay, you will do whatever you said that you will do, or you can change their thinking, but you must have patience, because really it can be a long process and you might not see the benefits at the moment. And probably all we were in the same place, you know, you have only 24 hours per day and a very limited budget where you spend your time and money budget. But I think all these conferences I went, although I have to admit that last year at some point I said, I'm not going, I can't do anymore. But in the end they paid off, because, you know, we didn't plan when we started the business to be in the public space, because I thought it's too difficult, you know, and we are too small. Honestly, I thought we are too small. Okay, we have one of the best technology, but, you know, winning a contract with New South Wales government, it was, you know, I honestly, I didn't think that a small company can do it. I thought that, and if you look at the on-demand pilots, you'll see big names, you know, really big names. And there it's also BYKKO, which is fantastic. But again, I am absolutely sure that all these conferences, and I was at some conferences, I was a speaker, at some we went just to have a small, you know, presentation with a demonstration, or just attending a conference to understand. But I think it's really helpful in your field, because you know, you understand what's happening, what is the trend, what are the trends, what are the opinions, and then, as I said, you build your reputation, personal, which always in startups and small businesses, your name is linked to your business. So it's the only way you can penetrate, you know, such a difficult environment what is now in these days. How can you get your name out? You know, you can have the best website or the best idea and no one will know.
When you were looking to actually get onto those pilot programs with the government, was there anything that, like, was it going to those conferences in the past that you met people that were actually in those positions to make decisions in government that helped, or was it?
Not necessarily, but someone who saw me at the conference, then they speak at the office, and then they knew about us. And actually, I got phone calls from people saying, you know what, we Googled bike sharing and I couldn't find you. But someone in the office, in the department said, it's a company there doing this. And I went back to my website developer, why they couldn't find it? I don't know what's wrong. And so yes, it definitely helped, you know.
So we might wrap it up now because we're coming to the end of the hour. But thank you so much, Monica. I would keep wondering whether or not BYKKO came about, if Newcastle, being in Newcastle, influenced you to name the business that way, because we're very good at abbreviating words with Y's and O's. But thank you so much for sharing your story today. Really, really appreciate it on such a busy week for you.